Everybody had a good Firaxicon today? Again, thank you guys so much for coming out. We really do appreciate it. We have one more presentation this evening. These are from two gentlemen who need practically no introduction, Mr. Sid Meier and Mr. Bruce Shelley. Give them a big hand, please.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I would like to thank our special guest for being here today, Bruce Shelley, all the way from Chicago. Bruce and I worked together for quite a number of years on quite a number of games, and I thought it might be fun to kind of talk a little bit about the story behind how some of those games got made. Some of them you may have heard of. What happens is over time, a lot of times it seems like that game was inevitable. That, the way it turned out was the only way it could have possibly turned out. But there's a lot of twists and turns between a game idea and the final product. And a lot of that is involved in kind of the story behind how it got from an initial idea to the actual product. So I thought we might be fun to talk with Bruce about what he remembers about those days, what I remember about those days, and how some of these games kind of came together. Might give you a little bit of an appreciation about how things were different back in those days, how things maybe are still somewhat the same. And I also give you a chance to maybe ask some questions about, if you had a question you always wanted to know about how Railroad Tycoon came to be, or what the story behind Civilization, or why did you do that, or whatever. So we'll get started with the first game that we worked on together was Covert Action. Back in the late 80s. It didn't actually get published until 1990. But Bruce had come to Microprose. I might do that once or twice, I'm sorry. Bruce had come to Microprose and had done some work on, I'll let him tell the story, how he came to Microprose.
I was hired to work on F-19 Stealth Fighter. I remember I worked in Baltimore for the Avalon Hill Game Company. I was a board game developer and designer. And I decided that the industry was going away, and I found out that the company that made Pirates was right here in the same city I worked in. So I lobbied those guys for a year trying to hire them. I thought, you need game people. You got one guy making games, the rest of you are artists and programmers. You need more people with game experience. And finally, after a year of bugging them, they did offer me a job, and they put me to work on F-19 making maps, 3D maps, and objects for the 3D game. That's how I remember it. And we had other jobs too. Everybody who worked there in the design job was managing other things, ports to other platforms and stuff like that. But my principal job was working on F-19.
So somehow I'd gotten on this Covert Action project. Bruce actually reminded me a short time ago that I'd seen a couple other people working on it, and I said, hey, that looks like fun. Maybe I should design that game.
Well, what I remember is that they kind of dropped the ball. They were having trouble making it work. And I thought Sid was intrigued by this idea of procedurally generating caseloads. Like one of the dreams is always make a procedural Sherlock Holmes game, which is generate Sherlock Holmes mysteries forever and ever. I know that people are still trying to do that, and but I think Sid was intrigued by that challenge, and I think that's personally looking back, that's what I think got him hooked.
And just to give you a little perspective, how many people do you think were working at Microprose at that time?
I would say in development, there was a hallway that divided the suits from the guys doing the work. And on our side, I would say it was like 30 or 40 people.
Yeah, and we were working probably on 3 or 4 games at that time. So things were a little different. That might have been, was that in the MPS Labs? Do you remember the MPS Labs days?
I do.
So yeah. We decided that development programming was cool, and the suits, as Bruce refers to them, were not so cool. So we decided we were MPS Labs, because there was like Bell Labs, and the Labs people were really cool. Thank the Hubble people for coming here. So we put a sign on the door between the business side of the building and the programming side.
You are now entering the labs.
MPS Labs.
And they have a photograph of Sid with his white lab coat. You remember that?
Yes, I did. I think I still have that lab coat. But anyways, we thought we were really cool in those days. So I was working on Covert Action, and I asked Bruce to work with me because he was a cool guy. And
Believe it.
Then the story is that apparently I went away on a summer vacation for 2 weeks, and I came back with a prototype of the game we actually ended up working on, which was Railroad Tycoon. So things were, we had this freedom, I guess, to just say, I don't want to do that game. I really would rather do this
You
game.
had the freedom. I did what I was told.
So I had, when I was a kid, my father and I put together a model railroad layout. And I remember that there was this track, it was HO, there was this track, and you had to put these little tiny spikes in the track, and every inch of track had probably like 10 spikes in it. And so I'm not sure what my dad was doing, but I was putting in these spikes for hour after hour to build this glorious model railroad that we actually never ended up finishing. But being a game designer, I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't it be cool to be able to just make model railroad layouts without having to put any spikes in? You just tell the computer what you wanted, and they would make this cool model railroad layout. So that was kind of the prototype. That was the inspiration before Railroad Tycoon. It was like, build a model railroad. And what ended up happening was a lot of us were playing Bruce's game 1830, the railroad board game. 1830. Anybody remember 1830?
Actually, it was designed by a fellow in England, a famous designer in England named Francis Tresham, and he wanted Avalon Hill to publish a version of it, and I was the guy who got that job. So he and I worked with it. So I made some changes to the game, but it was basically Francis's design, and we had enjoyed playing it. It was like I think one of the inspirations. I think the other inspiration was SimCity had come out, and they had trains run around SimCity. I think that caught your eye. That visual stuff caught your eye.
Yeah, I think 1830 kind of was the reason we gradually started adding more. And it was no longer a model railroad; it was a real railroad, and now you're making money. And it really evolved from this very simple model railroad game to adding all these other features. The stock market got put in there, and
the robber barons,
all these characters. And towards the end, I remember adding the other railroads because there was like no urgency, no competition. And one of the characters of 1830 is there's a lot of kind of backstabbing and cutthroating and competition. So probably a month or two before the end, I tossed really quickly in these competitive railroads, and they cheat totally, and they don't follow any of the rules, but they're there to kind of you kind of get in your way and give the game some sense of competition and urgency about making your railroad. So part of the story, I think, in those days was trying to fight the technology and trying to get the best out of the very limited technology that we had at the time. Railroad Tycoon was written on an IBM computer. We had just graduated from the days of having 4 colors to now glorious days of 16 colors. So there's a couple of screenshots here that you can see of how much we did with. There's one with lots of trains.
I remember the PC I had to work with had a 30 kilobyte hard drive. And we made. I mean, I did my job, whatever I had to do on this game with a 30 kilobyte hard drive.
And Bruce was talking a little while ago about how long it took and the cost of making.
Yes, one of the suits. I don't remember who. He asked me to put together some analysis of what it cost and to make this game, because the guys down in this other hall were not too excited about a railroad game. But so I analyzed. I took all the people who worked and what they got paid roughly. I didn't know exactly the time, and it turned out that at the time there was just Sid and myself and Max Remington, our artist, and it took about 6 months to make Railroad Tycoon. It cost the company about $167,000. By the time we added more people at the end, and so it looks incredibly cheap. Looking back in time, you can't hire a terrific programmer for that cost for 1 year today, I don't think.
And we tapped into the railroading community, which was really there. People who like railroads love railroads, and we got a ton of great feedback from them. I still remember kind of connecting with that community. The other thing I remember is there was this feature of the game where your bridges could wash out. And like you could buy a cheap wooden bridge or a little more expensive iron bridge or stone bridge. If you bought the cheap wooden bridge, it would kind of wash out every now and then. And you had to kind of rush to stop your trains before they would go into the river. And we had this philosophy that no one is ever going to die in our game. So we convinced Max Remington, the artist, to create this animation where this train would be heading for this broken bridge. And just before it got there, the engineer and the conductor would jump out, and the train would go over the edge, but they would be saved. So, so we tried to carry that forward, actually. I remember in Pirates, there would be this scene before the ship sinks, all the crew jumps off, and they're just swim away. So we had this idea that we didn't want anybody to die in our games, so we kind of went a little bit overboard in trying to do that.
I would say one more thing about those bridges. I thought that was a lesson that I remember for years. Well, I still carry it on. Is that originally the bridges would the things would just wash out, and the player could do nothing about it. So you'd be building this railroad, and you spend a lot of time, and all of a sudden, boom, this force of nature that would come in and crush you. And I was like, man, that sucks. And I think this came up one of your first presentation about game development I'd ever listened to. You said that the player should have the fun, not the designer. And it looked to me like this was a case where the program was having the fun, was wrecking my railroad, and I couldn't do anything about it. So that's when he came up with the idea of the bridges. And then the player had an interesting choice, which is another fundamental thing about design, I think, is that you give the player choices. So now I had a choice. I could build a cheap wood bridge, and I get my railroad running quickly, but it had the risk of washing out, or I could spend for the stone bridge and guarantee without the washout. So I thought that to me, I'd look back on that as one of the things that I thought was really fundamental about design. The player should have the fun, and I thought that was the thing I remember looking for.
One of our 10 rules of game design, which fluctuate over time, but that was one of the things we did at Microprose was try and think about what makes games work and kind of pass that along between the designers. And as Bruce mentioned, one of the inspirations for Railroad Tycoon was SimCity, and Railroad Tycoon was really the first game we did at Microprose that had this kind of construction aspect to it, starting small, building something of your own design, allowing you to be very creative in this fun sandbox. And that actually carried over to some of the other games that we'll talk about in a minute. Anybody have any questions about Railroad Tycoon and behind the scenes, what happened? That was kind of the first time Bruce and I had a chance to work together. No? Good. Okay. Oh, sorry, yes. Actually, almost every game that you'll see in this presentation has been remade at least once. Railroad Tycoon, not by us, but Railroad Tycoon was remade a couple times. And just to preempt any more questions, thank you for asking about whether we're going to remake Game X. And I have nothing to announce at this presentation. Okay. So after Railroad Tycoon, we came back to covert action. I guess that was a management decision. But we were still intrigued by this idea of the spy case, and my most vivid memory of covert action is what we now call the covert action rule, which is something not to do. With Pirates, we had a cool story with some cool action sequences that we kind of just spice it up. And we kind of overdid that with covert action. There was this cool mystery story that you were trying to unravel. And as part of that, you would dive into these fun mini-game sequences. I think we have a couple of them. There's like the one where you sneak through the building and open safes and get clues and toss grenades and shoot guards and things like that. These are kind of little games I always wanted to make, like a code-breaking game, cracking a code or solving a electronic circuit. So these are all really cool puzzle games, and you'd get clues as you went and did these things. And it was all the pieces were really fun, but what we found was that they got in your way. That you would be unraveling this mystery, and you have these clues, and you'd go into this building, and about 10 minutes later, you'd come out of the building, and it was like, what was that mystery? I forget the clue. It was basically, we boiled it down to 2 great games are not as good as 1 good game. And it's really actually, it's surprising how many times since then that kind of concept has come into play when we talk about a game design. Is, a lot of games have a strategic aspect and tactical aspect. And what we really got out of that was that you have to have your center of gravity somewhere very clearly. Like, this is where the game really happens. In Pirates, the strategy part, the sailing, the interacting with people is where the majority of the game is. And you kind of have a quick sword fight here or a quick ship battle there, but it doesn't take you out of the flow of the story. In covert action, it's a fine game, but I think it really has this issue of being hard to kind of keep in the players, keep the whole story in the player's mind. And it was a lesson we kind of, I think, took to heart in some of our later games. We got to feature our artist, Max Remington, with his unisex name, so you could be Max or Maxine Remington.
Right, I wrote the whole manual so you couldn't tell if the character was a man or a female.
Way ahead of our time. And I think it was a fun game to put together in terms of the mini games and things like that, but maybe not as well known as some of our other games. Although someone today did ask me, when is Covert Action 2 coming out? Again, I have nothing to announce today. Now, in the middle of developing Covert Action, I actually came to Bruce one day with a prototype of another game, which turned into Civilization. Some of you may. And the initial prototype, and this is kind of like a lot of the irony of development comes into play, was inspired by SimCity and was a real-time game. It was, you guys go build a city here, and let's farm in this area here, and we'll build a mining over here. And you'd kind of sit back and watch all this stuff happen. And what kind of worked well in SimCity you felt really removed from playing the game. You're more watching than you were doing. What I call where the computer's having all the fun, the model is having all the fun. So the genesis of the game, as I remember kind of being on a train with you, Bruce, and we said, Railroad Tycoon was fun. What's another topic that we could kind of take this start small, build approach? And being the bold youngsters we were, the history of civilization, no problem. We'll just toss that into a game.
I remember you told me once to choose a big topic for your game. I'm going, wow, how about the history? How can it get any bigger than this? History of civilization.
I agree. That's a good idea. That might make a good game, But actually, that's one of our other rules, the make it epic rule. I mean, if you're going to make a game, why not make it about some huge epic topic?
That made me laugh when years later people are making farm simulations. I'm going, it could be really interesting, but I'm thinking, man, this is a violation of the rules. I can't think about doing this. Running a farm? Come on, we just did Civilization. How are we going to make a game about a farm?
Okay, so maybe we need to revise that rule a little bit. But so we ended up looking at this prototype and saying it's interesting, but there's something not right about it. And we had this kind of real-time watching quality to it. And so we trudged back to Covert Action, I guess, and eventually shipped that. I don't know that we worked all that long on that game, but it.
I remember. I said, we should change this. We make this. This is fun. Let's do more of this. And you said, nope, we're finishing this game, and we're going to get on to the thing we really want to do, which is this other project that we're not telling anybody about.
That's true. We had to be a little bit surreptitious in those days about. We were basically inventing stuff as we went along, I think. I mean, we'd have an idea for a game and put a prototype together. And even in those days, there was the idea, well, we should be, we did this game and it was good. Microprose was known for flight simulators and things like that. We should be making some more flight simulators. I think we had other ideas.
I couldn't land an airplane, so I didn't really want to do flight sims.
Now, with Civilization, I remember a couple of things. That we now had access to 256 colors. And that was we couldn't guarantee there would be 256 colors, but some computers had 256 colors. Now the screen on the right here represents what we had to do in 16 colors. That's the best we could do in 16 colors. This is the Athens Times from 40 AD, apparently. Lions defeat gladiators 7-0. So we were having, to make fun, you have to have fun. So just kind of a indication of how empowered we felt to amuse ourselves. But a lot of the ideas that actually have carried forward into the more recent civilizations kind of were pioneered with Civ 1. This is the palace. Apparently, I've upgraded my statues, but I still live in a cave.
You got a good landscape architect, but your building guy is not doing the job for you.
The city view. I think that's Elvis there in my city.
Yeah.
Apparently, my happiness.
I remember being just totally blown away when Elvis showed up one day. How are we going to keep the population happy? We talk about happiness and political things and all the things that are entered into the picture. And then how are we going to make them happy? And next thing you know, I get a new build and there's Elvis.
So maybe you want to talk a little bit about the working process that we had in those days. It was kind of unusual.
Yeah, it was a very strong learning experience for me. Basically, I have a floppy disk at home somewhere in my stuff that says May 1990, and it's the first copy of Civilization that I ever played, and probably anybody other than Sid ever played. And I right away I knew this was cool, and it got better and better. But the way we worked is I was an employee, and I would get to work early, and Sid was a manager or a senior guy. He got in when he felt like it. So, but before he left every night, he would leave a disc in my desk, and I'd come in the morning and play. So by the time he arrived, hours later, I'd already put in hours of play, and I had a whole list of yellow pad full of stuff we could talk about. So we would have a couple hours of conversation about the game, and then I'd go off and do something else I was working on, another project possibly. And then before he left, he'd have a new build. So this went on, as I recall, for months. So basically, I'd get a new build. I'd play it. I'd tell him what I thought. He'd play it, think about what he was thinking about it. We would meet at some point during the day, and we'd discuss the things that had changed and what was working, what was not working, or what was missing, what do we need to add, what do we need to take away. And I just remember that iterative process being incredibly cool and just felt totally alive with what we were doing. I thought we were making something that's going to be special. And everywhere I've gone since then, I've carried that whole idea. This is how we make games. We prototype early and we iterate every day, play it every day, and change it every day. And I haven't seen a better way to make a game. If you can get the guys in charge, you're paying them money, let you do that, take the time. I've never seen a better way to make games, and it was just great to do it. That's my recollection.
Yeah, I remember thinking fairly early on that it was a little bit special. I don't know exactly what it was, but it fell together it was kind of easy in some ways. I've talked more recently about this valley of despair that seems to happen in most projects, where somewhere in the middle things just you're ready to give up. This project didn't seem to have that. Maybe time has erased that memory, but it just seemed like this game kind of came together fairly smoothly. There are definitely some wrong turns, and maybe talk a little bit about that. But overall, it felt like the game kept getting better and better.
I agree. I agree. I just remember you'd bring up something new, or I'd say, you're talking about how do you keep population happy? You have to feed them, you have to entertain them, clothe them. So we had all these different parts coming together, but maybe we didn't have them all together. But entertainment was the thing that came in late. I'm thinking, well, how do you entertain people? How do you entertain people in 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago? And we weren't going to have gladiators, I didn't think, And so
they were all dead.
That was the way. I just remember we'd have these they were not critical things that caused despair. It was a problem we had to solve, and solving those problems was great. It was really fun. Sometimes we'd talk about it, and more often than not, the answer would show up on the next disc that I got, and or we'd talk, and I never knew that the answer had been resolved. The next thing, there's a build, and there's an answer. I said, well, this is working. Yeah, okay. What's the next problem we're going to deal with? We got that one.
there's so much power in being a designer, and the fun of making these games is tossing in Genghis Khan and giving somebody nuclear weapons, or you just feel this sense of awesome power, and kind of Bruce and I would talk, and then an idea would pop up, and we'd just put it in the game, and like Bruce says, the next day it would be there. We have a museum here. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but there are a couple books there that I read when I was just kind of formulating the idea of the game, and I would highlight, like, oh, bronze working, yeah, okay, highlight that, gunpowder. So I almost literally translated these books into our tech tree, and it seemed so natural, but the whole idea of a tech tree was a new idea that we introduced, and then a lot of these things that went into the game, just you look back and say, wow, what would the world be like without a tech tree? I mean, how could we live without it?
Well, I think it was great because I think both of us had an interest in history, and I studied economics in graduate school. I liked economic history, and so it was cool to see all this come together and actually be applicable to making a game and having it make some rational sense. I mean, I remember thinking like a small thing, like we were talking about technology, and I thought about the stirrup. I'd read about the stirrup being critical in the history of warfare because a mounted man was only worth so much without a stirrup. But once he had a stirrup, he could anchor himself into the stirrup and put the lance, couch the lance, and he hit somebody not with the power of the lance, but with the power of the horse, a 2,000-pound horse, and himself. And it was like it revolutionized warfare for a while. The mounted man with a stirrup was the top weapon on the war. So a little thing like that became a technology that you researched and made your shit better. It was cool to see it all come full.
Another thing that I remember is just the idea of a strategy game was it was kind of a bad word in those days. Like, ooh, that's a strategy game. It's
There was a war game.
Yeah, it was like, and got your hexes and your units, and only hardcore nerds play those. Not cool nerds like us. The hardcore nerds would play that kind of a game. And the irony is that so many games are strategy. Strategy is a good word these days. That there's real-time strategy and turn-based strategy, et cetera. But it was a world where strategy was a bad thing, and I'd like to feel we played a part in turning it into a good thing, and there was so much that was just trying stuff out in Civilization. I think the scope of it, I still remember the very first screen with your settler and 9 squares, sorry. And that became this kind of iconic beginning of something exciting. People came to a point where they would look at that and say, "Ooh, I wonder what the story is going to be behind these 9 squares." And just to be able to start that small and create a different story every time, I think was really cool. And what happened was we really didn't know what we were doing, I think, but then we said later, it's like, oh, we've done something cool. What did we do, and how did we do it, and how do we do it again? And
Exactly.
that kind of turned into trying to analyze what was, where does this one more turn come from? Where does, what is it about this game that we made that actually works? And I think it's like the familiarity of it, the setting, the fact that you realize that gunpowder is probably going to be a handy thing to have someday, and we don't have to explain that to you. You see it there.
Gunpowder, good.
Or the fact that the world felt familiar and manageable, and the people that you ran into, or you had built-in personalities, with Genghis Khan or Gandhi with nuclear weapons or whatever. It's like I can identify immediately why I should worry about this person, or why that's funny, or the fact that it was tied into history, just enough history to make it familiar, but not so much that you had to kind of go back to your textbooks to be able to play, I think turned out to be a really cool balance.
I remember years later telling people about, somebody asked us about, I'm not sure what game it exactly was, but how detailed you did your research. I mean, you must have been really doing an incredible amount of research. And my answer was, no, the secret was we go to the children's section of the library. Because we're trying to reach a broad audience, and the children's books are full of pictures. We need lots of images to show our artists what we're trying to do. And that's a level of history that's probably appropriate to reach millions of players. If you really want to drill down, I think you're going to lose a lot of your audience. So the secret was to keep the history is just, we borrow the cool stuff from history, we leave the stuff we don't need where it is.
And then the manual that you created actually filled in a lot of that. I mean, it's amazing how many people actually read the manuals back in those days, because
Yeah, it's a lost art. I mean, I remember I came from a board game industry, and we used to put designer notes and historical notes in board games. And I always enjoyed reading those, so it was cool that I got a chance to write them. I mean, I'm sorry that people don't do it anymore. I thought it was part of the value added, I think. I mean, I remember some of the games we worked on, maybe here and later, that I did. We always added like further reading. We did some reading, so I like to add a list of stuff that these are the kind of things we drew from. If you enjoyed this, there's maybe you could read more. And it'd be gratifying years later to get letters, or even people here today talked about how playing your game changed my life and got me interested in something that led to a career. Or I remember Microsoft. I worked for Microsoft years later, and they talked about you get these letters from kids. My son was a poor student, but he played some of these games you make, and now he's interested in this stuff. We're excited, and Microsoft certainly, and anybody who's making games is gratified to hear that kind of response.
Yeah, I think one of the little dirty little secrets that we glommed onto with games like Civilization is that people don't like to be educated, but they do enjoy learning. And there's a kind of an interesting difference that in games like Civilization or Age of Empires, you do feel you're learning, you're getting better, you're learning strategies, you're learning different things, and at the end of the game, you're a slightly different person, slightly better person than when you started, and that feeling, I think, is part of the crack that these games games are. We were just talking about the books. He mentioned going to the children's section of the bookstore to do the research. My philosophy is to do the research after you've finished your game to justify whatever decisions you've made in trying to make the game fun.
Somebody said for that.
As I said, we took a lot of liberties with a game like Civilization, and it was up to Bruce to then justify all the things that we'd done in the manual. But
Yeah, thanks so much.
But it was always fun that was paramount. I think that also was kind of a cornerstone of what we were doing, is that whenever it came to going one way or another, it was like what direction is really the most fun. We can rationalize it later in the manual or whatever.
I remember years later I was doing a presentation for Bill Gates at Microsoft, and he suggested the game we were working on shouldn't that be marketed as educational. And my view then, and has never changed, is we have to entertain people first, and they may be intrigued to learn more. But if you don't entertain them first, they're never going to get to the next step. So, and that's why I mentioned earlier, borrow the stuff from history that's going to make fun, and we leave out the stuff that's not going to help us.
The scurvy in Pirates is a good example. People say, why is there no scurvy in Pirates?
Or slavery,
think about
or
it
Black
for a second.
Plague. Where's the Black
Right.
Plague? Why is the Black Plague not in the game? Right. Well, you play for a while, and 1/3 of your population all dies.
Not fun. So the technology of Civ, what I remember is, may not be all that exciting, but is the idea of overlays. For the first time, we had overlays. Now, in the PC, we were limited to 640 kilobytes, plus which included the operating system. So basically, when memory was full, you were done with your game. That was basically how you knew you were finished. If you'd filled up the memory available, it was time to ship. So, but then we discovered this cool thing called overlays, which was we would reserve an area of memory, and we could load stuff in from the disk and then ship it out when we didn't need it again. So Civ ended up having all these reports because we could put those on a separate piece of code that we would overlay and swap in and out. And whereas we didn't have that on Railroad Tycoon. So Civ ended up having, I think the city screen is on an overlay. We were able to do more. We're kind of, with our ambitions, we're always pushing up against the limit of the technology. And I remember feeling freed by having that. We were still limited, but I think we actually did a CGA version of Civ as well as so we'd had a 4-color version of Civ, 16-color, but now the glorious world of 256 colors was open to us, and we could color cycle and make the rivers flow and do all sorts of cool things that we couldn't do before. Still really enlisting your imagination, however, and making it all come to life. But as the technology was advancing, we were able to do some cooler and cooler things with the game. I'm thinking actually of some of the things we did wrong on Civ or were strange.
I did wrong, or you
No,
did
no,
wrong?
me. Although we did consult daily, as I recall, as you mentioned. So for some reason, I put zones of control into Civ 1. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't do that. But I really imagined pretty elaborate tactical battles happening on that map, and that never happened. It was more the stacks of doom that ended up being the way to play. But for some reason, I was imagining, I put in zones of control so you couldn't move from one square next to another unit next to it. So at one point, I had a map that was twice as big as the map that ended up going into the game, and I remember slogging my way across the continent in one game. I said, all right, this is not working out. This has to be. And that's actually another rule that more is not always better. There was a second tech tree in there at one point that we took out. And the controversy about squares versus hexes is, to me, still kind of interesting. That all of us who had kind of grown up in the board game world, loved hexes because they're so they don't have diagonals. We hate diagonals. But when we proposed this game, we just did not want to be labeled as geeky, uber nerdy strategy game. So we knew if there were hexes in there that people would freak out. So we made the game about squares, and we dealt with the evil diagonals. And the irony is, of course, a few iterations later, it was safe to put hexes into Civ, and now we embrace the hex. But
Your
just
inner hex.
just kind of interesting how over time things evolve, and again, the world is now safe for strategy. The other thing that struck me about the original Civ was that introduction with the music by Jeff Briggs, and in the beginning, the earth was without form and void. It's like, okay, we're going to do something here. I really felt it was important to set the stage. This is maybe different from any other game that you have played before. We're not ashamed of our ambitions. It's kind of like, this is the history of the world from the very beginning till you come and take over and create this to the present day, and even perhaps a little bit into the future. There was kind of a boldness, perhaps based on our youth at the time, that we were kind of willing to make that statement. And then I asked the artist to make these cool pictures of the Earth evolving, and I felt I'm not sure what had been done before that in terms of introduction, but I thought we were kind of making a statement in terms of that beginning that kind of set the tone for those nine squares showing up at the very beginning. Anyways, that was a fun part of the game for me to create. Any other mistakes that you recall, or
Mistakes. Well, there's an embarrassment that I've always
right.
been embarrassed by the fact that you run out of technology in Age 1, and Civilization 1, I'm sorry. You kept getting these technologies, like the Stirp I mentioned, and steel or something else, and then after a while you start building the spaceship to go to Alpha Centauri, but the technology just says, something cool happens here, another technology comes along here, it's going great. And I thought, man, this is embarrassing. We couldn't think of anything. The cell phone was not even around
future
yet.
technology number 7
Yeah,
has
it was
arrived.
a cell phone, and we couldn't think of the name. So next time I did a game, anything like this, I said, we're going to have plenty of technology, and you're not going to be able to get through the list. You can't get all the technologies in this game. Next game I worked on. I thought that was embarrassing.
it was hard to figure out how to end the game. I remember that. It's like I think at one point we had another iteration of units that you could evolve, and then future technology was just a little further down the road, and it was a game that didn't want to end. And we came up with the Journey to Alpha Centauri and a couple of other things, but it's one of the challenges. I think that's kind of one of the challenges Civ still is that, going all the way from that one unit to the end game and making sure everything is kind of really works along the way. Let me open it up for a minute or for a little bit and see if any questions about kind of the evolution of Civ and how it came to be. Yes, over. Thank you, Pete.
On the move.
Pete, let's hear it for Pete.
Yeah, let's hear it for Pete. The other face of Firaxis for a lot of us. We see these awesome images, and I get very nostalgic for living this and playing this growing up. Do you guys get nostalgic about these games, like in that way, or are you always picking apart, going, "Man, that Elvis, God, why did he put his hand up here? It should be over there." Like covert action, do you get nostalgic, or is it just like, oh, too many mini games?
I do. For me, enough time has gone by that I remember the good times and not some of the other times. I mean, when I saw that Gladiators versus Lions 7-0, the other day when I was grabbing the images, I laughed out loud. It was like, oh man, we were having a good time, so I do. I have really fond memories of that time, and to see that screen with the 20 different trains on it. I kind of remember how much fun it was to put that all together. So I definitely feel there's a warm spot, in my heart for these games, certainly.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, it's like I tell people, I got a chance to play for a championship team. You just don't forget it.
Other questions?
Yeah, when I saw these old screenshots of Civilization, I think, and especially the Athens Times from 40 AD, I think there was a lot of humor in those games back then, and I think that has kind of disappeared a bit. Did it disappear with you, not taking an active seat anymore in developing the games, or where did the humor go?
Well, to me, we could not create realistic images. We could not create a realistic game. So that made humor a way to do something special with the game. It was. I think if it's ultra realistic, then you don't expect humor. But this was kind of, 16 colors was all we had here. So and we're trying to create fun. And if we are not having fun, a lot of times, it's not going to show through. If we are having fun, hopefully that'll encourage fun in the player. But the other thing I think is we're calling this game Civilization, and that's kind of a scary name, And we are inviting you to control thousands, hundreds of millions of people through 6,000 years of history with armies, and that could be pretty daunting. So this is a little wink at the player that we're on your side. We're here for you. We're gonna make it fun for you to play. So I think we did try to put some humor in games, whether it's the evil Spaniard guy in Pirates or these kind of overdrawn James Bondy characters in Covert Action. It's kind of like we get it. We're here. We're both here to have fun. We're working. We're doing this together. Let's enjoy it. I think is kind of part. I think what we're trying to say there. And Bruce is a funny guy, so he encourage that.
Not just eye candy.
All right, so you mentioned that you were trying to kind of keep it a covert action, that you were developing this. You had to keep it on the down low for a little while. How far into it were you when you finally had to come clean and tell the suits what you were working on, and what was their response? I'm
trying to remember. I think we worked for a little under a year, but maybe a year on this game. Was that? Yeah. Bruce was a producer, so he should know all this stuff. I kind of remember there was another game that was maybe that was.
Well, we did. I don't remember now. I'm getting old, but we did Railroad Tycoon for a month, and then I was forbidden for working on it because the suits didn't like it. and then we went back. Then I had to work on covert action, or it was other things, but that made me work on covert action. But and then I tell you, I don't remember when the Civilization bubbled up, and how long it was for long, because.
You had mentioned that I didn't want anybody else to play it, or you were the only person allowed to play it. Is that what you're...
Well, this is another memory I have, is like when he would give me a disc, he wouldn't let anybody else play it. I was the only one allowed to play it. So, I mean, I'd have a crowd in my office some days. They say, okay, what's he done now? And, and tell me about this and what's going on here. And I'm going, well, you guys be quiet here. I'm working here, and... And I'm not really sure. We've talked about it. We don't remember exactly what it was, but I think what it was that he trusted me as every man, average guy, average gamer, and we could communicate well. And if he gave it to everybody, that he'd be inundated with 1,000 ideas, and he was content that I wasn't threatening to be the top game designer in the company. I was a guy that he could work with. I wasn't going to threaten him at the top there. So I'm not sure that's true, but basically, just he wanted to filter the news, and I think both of us now, in retrospect, think that was probably not a good idea. I mean, I believe that you should get as many eyeballs on your product early as you can, especially people you trust. And everywhere I've worked since, it's been a requirement that everybody on the project play the project daily, if not weekly, if not daily. And so I think that maybe some of the things that we could have done better in the first game, Civ 1, could have been fixed if there had been more people trying it earlier on, and if we had more time to do it, and whatever, I don't know. But I mean,
and there wouldn't have been a need for a Civ 2 or 3
Yeah,
or
that's
4
true.
or
We
5.
should.
I
I think we did a good job of not making
yeah.
it perfect, because you've been milking that cow for.
Just to follow up on, not exactly that, but there's an interesting phenomenon, the Civ designer burnout, that everyone who designs a Civ game is not at all interested in designing the next Civ game. And there's something about making a Civ game that kind of, burns you out.
Well, I mean, it seems reasonable to me, because there was a lot of excellent things in there, and certainly Brian and Jeff did an excellent job with Civ 2. Then I think the guys who had the real, because we did things that were not great, in the first version. To me, I mean, there was a lot. People figured out how to break the game right away, and there was other things that we could have had more technology, possibly.
Bruce,
so there was
come
some. I mean, so there was Civ 2 was like there was a lot of things that could be improved, but building on Civ 2, I think it got much harder. The barriers got harder to do better things. I mean, I'm glad I didn't have that job.
Well, Bruce, we didn't have day 0 patches or things like that back in the day. You put on a
We
disc,
didn't have
you shipped
metrics.
it, and that was the game. Did we have testers? I don't remember.
I was the tester.
So it's your fault.
Yeah, I take blame. Yeah, dump it on me. I got big shoulders.
Other questions?
Hi, just Sid, what would be your favorite Civ game that you've worked on? I know you've enjoyed a lot of them, but what would you say is the one that you've enjoyed the most designing?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think of them all as, all the games that I've made, as different children, as my children, And if you have children, there's no favorite. There's like the smart one, and the funny one, and the cute one. And I think the games are different in that way, that there's a game that I remember we had a lot of fun making this game, or this game is pretty intense, or this game has got a lot of intellectual heft to it. But they were all games that I wanted to make and look forward to making, and they were fun to make. And there's another 20 that I wanted to make and haven't made yet, and they're still sitting on our hard drive. But I can't choose a favorite for me. They're all fun. Now, talking to people, certainly games like Civilization, Pirates, Railroad Tycoon are the ones that they come back and say, I still remember playing that game, or when are you going to make another one? Or I think those are the games that seem to have resonated the most. But I had a lot of fun making covert action or CPU Bach or whatever it was. The process of making a game itself is very rewarding. So I have these kind of fond memories of all my little children out there.
One more.
I was just thinking about a Railroad Tycoon question, which I forgot to ask the first time. I remember when playing it, I learned a lot of geography from Railroad Tycoon, actually. I never understood, this is a technical question, did the cities grow whether you built railroads into them or not? Was that model for the city growth related to whether you were there?
You know, I actually kind of remember the answer to that question. They grow somewhat, but the more stuff that's delivered there, the faster they will grow. But I mean, you're right. The idea of putting the entire eastern United States represented by little tiny pixels was pretty bold in its day, and the fact that it would grow over time, based on what you did, was revolutionary. Thank you. Thank you.
So how did you break the news, or what was the response to the suits when you told them you spent a year of time developing Civ?
Well, I don't think it was a total secret, but as Bruce mentioned, they hadn't actually gotten to play it, and I think that might have actually whetted their anticipation and appetite, you know. I still remember getting a call from Bill Staley. Times were very different then. So we shipped Civ and into a vacuum. I mean, in those days, you would release a game and we'd shake each other's hand and we'd move on to something else. There was no internet. There was no feedback. You know, you get a trickle of letters back after a couple weeks. And for Civ, they had this almost form letter. It was like, dear Sid and Bruce, I liked your game Civilization. I had a great time playing. It was a lot of fun. By the way, here are the things that I would change about it. Thank you very much. So we started to get this kind of feedback, which by the volume and the intensity of the suggestions that were in there, we kind of got the idea that something was happening. And I think 2 or 3 months after the game went out, I got a call from Bill Staley, who was the president of Microprose. He was at a conference or convention somewhere, and he said, "Sid, people are talking about your game. I think it's going to be good." You know, I said, "I'm happy to hear that." "Oh, thank you, Bill." So it really took, I would say, months before we got any sort of indication that people were playing and responding to it, and it was really through letters, and of course, the magazines would come out monthly with the 3-month lead time or whatever. So there was very little feedback, the kind of instantaneous feedback that we have today. So it took quite a while before we realized we were kind of onto something there.
I felt we were making something special, and I think as more and more people at the company got involved and everybody got to play it and the testing, I thought the company, everybody that worked there, certainly on the development side, had a very, very positive attitude. This game was going to be awesome. I thought we were making something special. It was going to rock the game world. Whether they knew it or not, it might take them months, but it was going to rock the world. I really felt positive about it. And I remember one of my friends, Glenn Drover, who was a sales guy, but he's always wanted to be a game designer. He's actually doing now. He would come back and bug me all the time. He'd be in town for a sales meeting. He says, "Okay, what is this game all about? What's happening now? What's he changed? What's new?" And I know he was super enthusiastic. So I trusted Glenn's instincts, and I felt that it was a sleeping bomb that was going to go off in the game industry. These people, I don't know, okay, we released it this day. Maybe it was going to take months, but when it went off, it was going to go off, and people were going to really like it. I had a really positive view about it.
One of the things I always hear you say about the good old days, and one of the things I always garner is like the fact that like designers had a much more tangible, personal approach in the product of a game. Now I heard a rumor or something like that in Civ 3 that there's like, there's a lovely finale of a Haydn piano sonata, and as an avid lover of music, I was wondering if you were playing that, or if there's like any other like little personal touches in these Civ games that not many of us know about.
There was a screenshot that came up a minute ago from Civ where the science advisor is handing out some lovely technology. The artists were having fun by, I think they have put me into quite a few of our games, I guess. So that's a little fun touch. There's a really cool credit screen in Railroad Tycoon where Bruce is wearing a railroad hat and I'm in a suit or something. And since we only had like 5 people max working on the game, we could have fun with that. We didn't do a lot with Easter eggs because I don't know.
We weren't artists. Plus, to a sense, maybe because we were front and center and talking about this game, and that the Easter eggs came from the art groups, as I recall, because that was one of their ways to personalize their work on the project. We were already all over it, in many ways. It was sort of like our baby, but they could do something. I remember they could sign the game their own way secretly. It came later, I think.
Yeah, for me, there was also a little bit of a style that we enjoyed. I mean, the screen here, greetings from our most wise Queen Elizabeth of the English. Our words are back with nuclear weapons, I mean, just kind of going a little bit over the top in terms of the intensity and the kind of fun of the game, I think was our little Easter egg to the player, I think.
Thank you. Speaking of older games, how do you feel about sites that specialize in selling older games like GOG.com? Good old games.
I guess we're in favor of that. Yeah, I think these games, the striking thing to me, I think, is how much the technology has changed and how little kind of the essence of game design has changed. That some of these ideas that we expressed like 25 years ago still kind of hold up today. So having the opportunity to play some of those older games, I think, is certainly a good thing. But the fact that Bruce and I are still making games, even though we don't necessarily code in the latest style or understand the latest technology, we have a feeling for game design. I think that still works today. So to be able to see and play some of these original games, I think is a good thing. We were talking a little earlier about how, in a lot of ways, we did a flight simulator game and one of the first submarine simulations, and Pirates was one of the first open world games, and Civilization was, kind of established a bit of a genre in terms of strategy and 4X, et cetera. A lot of these games, a lot of times it's interesting to see what was the first game, where did this whole genre start from, and that's certainly where it gives you an opportunity to do that.
I remember talking about old games. There's a game called Empire Deluxe, and we didn't mention that, but I think it was one of the influences when we were making these games. I remember I was talking today to Sid about, remember when you gave me a task, we've been playing Empire Deluxe, and he said, come up with 10 things that you would change about Empire Deluxe if you could. And that was some of the stuff we thought about for Civ. And I remember I felt I was a new guy in the job, and I wanted to make a big impression, so I came up with 12 things.
Yes.
I think you've managed to all but answer the question I had, which was your games are famous for being the one more turn, kind of addictive nature games. And I was wondering what particular inspirations you had to draw upon that
There were
shaped you.
probably 3 games that I remember very well. Empire, which had this revealing the map quality to it, which was became one of the fundamentals of Civilization. But you'd be playing, and all of a sudden a unit would show up on the edge of your, what you could see, and you would, oh, what's going on over there? I better, and then that would gradually reveal itself. So I think that the exploration aspect of Civ was inspired quite a bit by Empire. SimCity, I think all of us were playing that at the time, and just that change in focus from let's blow everything up, as quickly as possible with explosions as large as possible, to let's build something. Let's have, here's a nice little space. Let's make something here. That inspired, I think, part of Railroad Tycoon, and certainly was something that we carried forward into Civilization. And in an interesting way, Railroad Tycoon kind of inspired Civilization, because we were able to make, what's now called a God game, or we were able to make these systems that interact to create an interesting game. I think that's kind of the heart of Civ to me, is these simple systems. We feed your people and they will grow. Build a city and it will make stuff. Talk to other leaders. If you have a bigger unit than they have, you will win. The individual systems are very comprehensible and easy to understand. But the way they interact with each other and the way you need to trade them off makes each game different and creates we call kind of an interesting complexity. And Railroad Tycoon kind of explored that with operating a railroad and financing a railroad and buying and selling stock and competing with other railroads. It was kind of like a bunch of stuff going on, but the way it all worked together was cool. So that idea of being able to have a number of interesting systems in the same game at the same time, have them really work together to create all sorts of things to think about, kind of led to that one more turn. You know, you've always got something building and something to explore, and you know, so those. To me, those three things kind of, together with just the epicness of the topic, you know, stirred together, kind of were what turned out to be Civilization.
More?
I guess we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Could a game like this be made today, something that's so far outside of what's proven of like the flight simulators that you were supposed to do, or are things just too expensive and too codified now in our different genres?
That's a great question. I think it's very hard to get visibility these days. I mean, there weren't that many games out when we put out Civilization. If you wanted to play a game, you know, if you randomly went into a store, closed your eyes and grabbed something, you might grab Civilization. So it was a different time. I think that the challenge today is even if you have a really cool, unique game, how do you get it out there? How do you get people to know about it? So I think the other issue is the development cost. I mean, if you're trying to make a AAA game, you know, I don't know how much it costs us to make Civilization, but it's probably certainly just a couple $100,000. You know, today it's millions and millions. So it's hard to be as adventurous risking that kind of money. So. On the other hand, I think it's a great, you know, we're still in a golden age of games. When you look at the cool titles that are out there, both in the AAA space and also the indie and the mobile and all, you know, whatever kind of game you want to play, you can probably find it. That's the good news. In our days, you know, if you want to play a strategy game, you pretty much had to play Civilization or SimCity. You know, those were your choices.
I would say that I've thought about this too, in that I've been making games now professionally as a living for like 35 years, and I think there's always been what I call a frontier platform, where a small team could do something significant, no matter, you know, how all that time period. So my case example is this fella in Vietnam a couple years ago who made Flappy Birds or something like that. I mean, by himself. Here's a guy in Korea who made a game out of nowhere that was making, I don't know, what was it making, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a day or something like that? Something crazy. So in spite of the fact that you can spend $200 million making a game, here's a fella off the beaten path in Korea who made a game, or Vietnam, I guess it was, who made a game that really rocked the world, changed a little bit. So I think I'm not giving up the idea that there's somebody, small team or some individual can't do something really special. I think that's going to be the case for forever.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your interest. And
So we don't really want it to come to an end quite yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our raffle now real quick. We're going to have Sid and Bruce draw some numbers out of a...